January the 22nd, 1879, the mighty British Army suffers its worst defeat at the hands of a native force at the Battle of Isandlwana. But how did an army armed with just spears and shields slaughter such a modern army? This is the story of the Battle of Isandlwana. By the 1870s, the British Empire had gained a foothold in South Africa. However, to unify the whole of South Africa and absorb it into the British Empire, the independent kingdom of Zululand, which bordered on Natal, had to be suppressed. Using any excuse to do so, British colonial officials and the Commander-in-Chief in South Africa, Lord Chelmsford, claimed that the Zulu kingdom and the vast armies the Zulu king Cetshwayo had raised was a serious threat to the British colony of Natal, which it shared a border with along the famed Buffalo River. As a result, on the 11th of December 1878, the British authorities delivered an ultimatum to King Cetshwayo on the banks of the Thukela River with outrageous terms which included the disbanding of the main Zulu army. Along with the outrageous terms, Cetshwayo was given a 20-day window in which to comply. Despite wanting to avoid a war at all costs with the British, Cetshwayo realized war was inevitable. Therefore, he ordered his armies to only defend their country and to not carry out war beyond the Zulu border for fear of being seen as an aggressor. The British, in absence of a satisfactory response to their ultimatum, invaded Zululand on January the 11th, 1879. The British invasion was split into three columns, with the centre column led by Colonel Glynn of the 24th Regiment of Foot, accompanied by Lord Chelmsford himself. The British centre consisted of both battalions of the 24th Regiment of Foot, units of the Natal Native Infantry, Natal Irregular Horse, and the Royal Artillery, consisting of a total of around 4,700 men. On the morning of January 11th, 1879, the centre column of the British Army, in full spirit and full of vigour, marched into Zululand across the Buffalo River at Rorke's Drift. The British plan was to advance east and link up with the British right column, led by Colonel Pearson, before driving on Ulundi and taking on the Zulu army head-on in a decisive engagement. However, the difficult, hilly scrub terrain within Zululand and the heavy rains of the African summer made the wagon trails almost impassable, greatly slowing the centre column's advance. By January 20th, 1879, the column had only advanced as far as the mountain of Isandlwana. Weary from their difficult and slow march, Lord Chelmsford ordered the centre column to encamp on its lowest slopes. The next day, January 21st, a British mounted reconnaissance force under the command of Major Dartnell encountered a large Zulu force on the road to Ulundi in the direction of the King's Kraal. Excited by the opportunity of an early engagement, Chelmsford foolishly divides his force and orders the main bulk of the centre column, consisting of the 2nd Battalion 24th Regiment of Foot, the mounted infantry, and 4 guns, to move against the Zulu force at first light on the 22nd. Little did he know, Lord Chelmsford had made a tactical decision which would confine the remaining force at Isandlwana to its impending doom. At first light on the 22nd, Chelmsford and his force advanced east, leaving the camp lightly defended and under the command of Colonel Pauline, with Colonel Durnford bringing up No. 2 column in support of the camp. The remaining force, consisted of 5 companies of the 1st Battalion, 24th Regiment of Foot, 1 company of the 2nd Battalion, 24th Regiment of Foot, 1 company of Mounted Volunteers and Natal Police, 2 companies of the Natal Native Infantry, and 2 7-pounder guns and 70 men of the Royal Artillery, totaling around some 1,700 men, officers and other ranks. At 10:30 a.m, Chelmsford's force linked up with Dartnell's reconnaissance unit on the road to Ulundi, only to discover, to their surprise, that the Zulu Impi was nowhere to be found. Without realising, the Zulu Impi had slipped away during the night and bypassed Chelmsford's force to link up with the main Zulu army now advancing on the hopelessly exposed camp at Isandlwana. At 11 a.m. on the morning of the 22nd, mounted troops from the camp pursued a small party of Zulus north of the camp, eventually pursuing the party into a fold in the hills. To their absolute horror, the mounted troops stumbled upon the entire Zulu army, consisting of some 20,000 warriors resting in the fold. Realizing they had been spotted, the Zulu army leapt into action and hastily began forming into their attack formation and advancing in the direction of the camp. The Zulu battle formation was known as the Horns of the Buffalo, which consisted of the head, horns and loins. The strategy was for the head and loins to deliver the initial frontal assault, drawing in the enemy, while the horns completed a flanking attack, eventually encircling the enemy and overwhelming them. As a mounted troop warned the camp of the attack, Colonel Pauline quickly dispersed all companies into an extended firing line away from the camp to meet the Zulu assault head-on and check it with superior firepower. East of the camp, Colonel Durnford's troops, who were scouting nearby hills, ran into the left horn of the Zulu attack and retreated to a dried-out riverbed and took up firing positions. Until noon, with the aid of the Royal Artillery, the British successfully managed to pin down the Zulu centre with devastating volley fire. However, the intense focus on the Zulu centre left the British flanks vulnerable, which the Zulu horns were now beginning to exploit. As the battle raged on, Durnford's company began to run desperately low on ammunition and thus withdrew to the camp, leaving the British right flank exposed in the process. To counter this, Pauline ordered all units to fall back in good order to the camp to concentrate their firepower further. It was at this moment that the battlefield was plunged into darkness due to a solar eclipse. Seizing the opportunity, the Zulu left horn and centre rushed forward with tremendous ferocity, overrunning the British left flank and bursting into the camp. Terror ensued as desperate hand-to-hand combat erupted in the dim light of the burning tents. As the British troops were driven deeper into the camp, the Zulu right horn appeared from behind isandlwana mountain to complete its encirclement. Realizing all hope was lost, those who could fled along Fugitives' Drift, leaving the less fortunate to their fate. Those who were cut off fought a bitter and bloody last stand in small groups, mostly dying whilst fighting back to back with their comrades in arms. Colonel Durnford himself was killed whilst bravely trying to defend the wagon trail entrance to the camp. Those who made their escape along Fugitives' Drift were relentlessly pursued by the overwhelming Zulu force. Famously, Lieutenants Coghill and Melville were cut down on the banks of the Buffalo River whilst trying to protect the Queen's colour, for which they would both go on to be posthumously awarded the Victoria Cross. The battle met its bloody end on the banks of the river, where some 60 men of the 24th, exhausted and demoralised, were slaughtered. Upon returning to the camp, late on the evening of the 22nd, and now with the Zulu army nowhere to be seen, Chelmsford, who had ignored Pauline's pleas to return to the camp during the battle, was left in absolute shock. His arrogance and incompetence had left the mountainside littered with the mutilated corpses of his once proud army. To rub salt in the wound, Chelmsford, who had feared a Zulu attack across the border into Natal, could now see the mission station at Rorke's Drift ablaze in the night sky. But that is a story for another episode. Thanks for watching, and remember, if you liked the episode, give it a thumbs up and smash that subscribe button to see more exciting episodes in the future and help the channel grow.